This week's Torah portion is entitled Re'eh, to see. The first line of the parashah reads, "See, this day I set before you blessing and curse." The parashah goes on to say that if we obey God's commandments, good things will happen, we will be blessed, and if we choose not to follow, we will be cursed. Throughout the majority of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses continues retelling the story of our people to the Israelites who are about to cross the sea into Israel. Most of the stories involve us being commanded to listen or to hear, not to see. Moses relays what God has told him about what we are supposed to do and supposed to remember when we enter the Promised Land. But with the exception of the 10 Commandments, which Moses physically brought down to us, everything else is transmitted orally. Even our response when being asked if we will accept the Torah is na'aseh v'nishma. We will hear and we will do. So why is this passage being with the imperative to see? Biblical scholars tell us that no word in the Torah is superfluous. Every word is there for a reason. So what are we being told to see instead of listen? Some would argue that we are being asked to envision both paths. The first path, that of obeying God's commandments, which leads us to a life of blessing, and the second path of disobeying God's ways, which leads to a path of curses and hardships. By seeing or envisioning these paths, the choice becomes clear. We should follow God's ways. But I would argue that there's more meaning in the command to see rather than listen. Years ago, a sociology graduate student conducted an experiment. She dressed in rags and spent several days sitting in front of various stores and establishments to see how she would be treated. While her treatment overall was despicable, she wrote about how the most depressing part of those days was not the lack of help that people offered, nor were it the looks of pity she too often received, but the most degrading aspect of begging was that she too often felt invisible. When patrons would avert their eyes and not even acknowledge her presence, she actually felt worse than when a patron would smile at her and continue walking without any offer of assistance. To be rendered invisible is to be told that you don't matter. When we avert our eyes, we are sending the message that they are not only not worthy of our help, but not even worthy of our acknowledgement. By hiding our eyes and refusing to look at the person, we are stripping them of their humanity. The sociology graduate student continued and wrote that the hardest, most painful part of the day was feeling that she didn't even count as a human being in the sight of so many people who walked right past her. By looking away and refusing to recognize her presence, she was left feeling unseen, alone, and degraded. We live in an increasingly isolated and lonely world. So much so that last year, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, raised the alarm about the devastating and dangerous effects of loneliness and isolation in our country. But we already knew it was a problem. Back in 2001, Robert Putnam published his book, Bowling Alone, that spoke of a growing American epidemic of loneliness. And that was even before we had iPhones and smartphones. Mr. Putnam spoke of the diminishing connections people had within their own communities, from not knowing our neighbors, to our kids no longer playing outside with all of the neighborhood kids, to the loosening bonds of community cohesion. Already, back in 2001, we were seeing less attendance and affiliation at religious institutions and less community-based programming and services being offered and utilized. The ubiquitousness of smartphones has only served to exacerbate our problem of loneliness, as people now spend more time looking at their phones rather than their friends, at pixels rather than people. And then came the pandemic. We were told to physically stay away from all people not related to us or in our household for both our protection and theirs. This further isolated people, especially those who already felt isolated, as it took away many of the opportunities for people who lived alone to be with anyone else at all. What all of this has created is a world where too many people feel unseen or invisible to the rest of the world. Maybe the imperative to see is reminding us of the importance of seeing the people in our own lives. If we don't, we run the risk of our life feeling lonely and cursed. So how do we ensure that we are seen and make others feel seen as well? One way our schools are actually trying to help this is by limiting or banning cell phones during school. This week, California became the 5th state to ban cell phones in school. Both New York City and New York State are considering similar measures. Even without legislation, many individual schools and districts have already taken action. At one high school in South Los Angeles, the principal banned phones when students returned to in-class learning after the pandemic. Since then, she has seen an uptick in students' ability to focus, higher test scores, and a decrease of on-campus fights. But she said that the biggest shock to her was that they actually had to bring out games and things to entertain the children at lunch because, in her words, they became kids again. We heard conversations occurring again. Lunchtime was no longer quiet. It became a real schoolyard with real activity. We live in a world where too many people are too busy looking down at their phones to truly look up and see the people in front of them. But it's more than just our phones. Our world has increasingly allowed us to isolate. As more and more interactions take place digitally, we lose our opportunities to engage with new people who may have views that are different than our own. We ask Google for book recommendations instead of the library. We order our books online instead of wandering the book aisles and running into a person or a book that we might not have had on our radar. We play video games or we surf the web instead of going outside to experience life in person. And we stream our entertainment, meaning that each person, even in the same household, may be on a different screen watching a different show alone. As each of these interactions with our world move further and further into the digital world, we lose more of our ability to spontaneously meet, interact, and learn from people who aren't already in our own circle. Only with a conscious and concerted effort to engage with the real world can we begin to reverse and reestablish those connections. So how do we create opportunities to feel more seen, to allow others to feel seen by us? By engaging in the real world, by attending services or any program here at Stephen Weiss or elsewhere, by walking into a store to make a purchase instead of ordering online, by pursuing our interests and hobbies with real-world activities, by volunteering for causes we believe in. Even simple things as looking up from our phones when we're walking around and smiling at someone or saying hello. As the new school year is upon us this coming week and the Jewish New Year is quickly approaching, make a commitment to see the people around you. You never know, you may end up feeling seen as well. Shabbat Shalom.